Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are going somewhere pretty profound. We're stepping into the final defining moments of, well, maybe the most famous life in all of Western philosophy.
We really are. Our source material is Plato's Phaedo.
And this text is just so unique. It's not just a dusty historical document. It's this powerful mix of a harrowing emotional story and a truly towering blueprint for the nature of the soul.
It is. It's absolutely unique. I mean, you have to picture it. We aren't just analyzing arguments from a distance. We are, for all intents and purposes, sitting right there in that Athenian jail cell.
Yeah.
We're witnessing the final hours of Socrates. His trial is over. He's been condemned, but the execution hasn't happened yet. And that scenario just immediately creates this unbelievable tension.
It really does. It confronts you, the listener, with the ultimate existential question, right?
Sure.
How do you face death? And not just with acceptance, but with what seems like genuine joy.
Joy, exactly. And that is our core mission for this deep dive. The emotional stakes, the philosophical stakes, they just couldn't be higher. We need to perform a really rigorous reconstruction of the argument Socrates is using in that cell.
Because the central puzzle, right from the opening lines, is just that.
Yeah.
How was Socrates so completely at peace with his own execution? I mean, why was he calmly arguing for the immortality of the soul right up until they handed him the hemlock?
Well, Phaedo, who is the narrator of the whole dialogue, he captures that strange feeling perfectly. He's there watching his friend die. And he says he felt this bizarre, unaccustomed mixture of pleasure and pain. The pain is obvious, of course, you're watching a friend die. But the pleasure...
The pleasure came from where?
It came because Socrates appeared, and I'm quoting here, happy in both manner and words as he died nobly and without fear. He was, philosophically treating his own death not as an end, but as a journey to a better place.
Which sets the stage for philosophy itself as this incredibly courageous act. But we have to zoom out for a second and talk about authorship. Who are we really listening to here? Is this the historical Socrates, word for word? Or is this Plato?
That distinction is absolutely crucial.
Right. Is Plato just using his mentor's final hours as a kind of stage for his own more advanced theories?
That's it, exactly. While the historical Socrates, especially in earlier dialogues like the Apology or the Credo, was famously non-committal, almost agnostic about what happens after death, the Socrates we meet in the Phaedo is not only certain of immortality, he's deploying these two incredibly sophisticated philosophical pillars that they belong squarely to Plato.
And those two pillars are what?
So first, you have this heavy influence of Pythagorean beliefs, these ideas about purification, the soul being reincarnated, the sort of cyclical return, and the need for an ascetic life.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the second?
The second, and this is the big one, is the fully developed Platonic theory of eternal non-physical forms. These perfect concepts like beauty itself, justice itself, the equal itself. Plato is, in essence, weaving his own advanced metaphysics into the final dramatic conversation of his beloved mentor.
So our deep dive today is really about understanding the philosophical engine that was powering Socrates' absolute serenity in that moment.
Yes.
So if we were to create an executive thesis for this, the single claim that unifies all the arguments we're about to hear, what would it be?
I think it would have to be this. The true philosopher practices for death, because death is simply the separation of the soul from the corrupting body, and this separation is what finally allows the soul to attain wisdom and immortality, a reality that can only be grasped through pure reason, through the forms.
And what's the context here? What problem is this text trying to solve?
The contextual note is that this text is tackling a massive philosophical and ethical problem for the ancient world. It's trying to establish actual proof that the soul survives death. And if it does survive, then it has to outline exactly how you should live your life in anticipation of that fact. It's this beautiful integration of Pythagorean ideas on moral purification with Plato's own metaphysics. Because if death isn't an ending but an ascent, well, then everything changes. Everything
changes. Let's start to unpack that ascent, beginning with the very first puzzle that comes up in that jail cell.
Let's do it.
So Socrates starts by talking about, of all things, the physical sensation of pleasure he feels now that his chains have been removed. He's rubbing his leg and remarking on how pleasure follows pain.
A classic Socratic starting point, grounded in immediate experience.
Right. And then he says his friends should follow him quickly into death, but in the very next breath, he warns them that taking your own life is wrong. So how do we square that? It seems like a direct contradiction. Why should a philosopher be willing to die, but be forbidden from committing suicide?
This is the perfect opening move for the whole dialogue because it immediately establishes our relationship to the divine. Cebes is the one who raises the objection, and Socrates responds with this really powerful analogy.
Which is?
We are, Socrates suggests, possessions of the gods. We're their property, much like a slave is the property of their master.
So a possession doesn't have the right to destroy itself?
Precisely. You wouldn't be happy if your own possession just decided to kill itself without your permission. You have to wait until a god indicates the necessity. Like the necessity, he says, now put upon us.
Ah, so suicide is like a soldier deserting their post. But welcoming death, in his case, is accepting the orders of his commander.
Exactly. It's an act of obedience, not
Like-
self-will. And crucially, it's an act that leads to purification. And this brings us right to the core premise of this whole section, that philosophy is in fact a preparation for death.
Okay, so let's reconstruct the logic there. Why exactly does a philosopher desire death?
We can really break this down into the first major argument of the text. It's about the philosopher's ultimate goal. It has about 3 premises and a conclusion.
Let's walk through it.
Okay, P1, the first premise. Death is fundamentally the separation of the soul from the body. That's its definition.
Simple enough.
P2. The body, through its senses, its needs, its desires, actively hinders the soul's ability to grasp pure, permanent knowledge, to grasp truth.
It's a source of noise.
It's a huge source of noise, and that leads to P3. Pure knowledge, and by that he means the forms, like justice itself, beauty itself, goodness itself, is only accessible to pure thought. And pure thought has to operate without the interference of the body.
So if you put all that together,
The conclusion, Seal, is that the philosopher's entire life, the actual practice of philosophy, is nothing other than training for death, training for dying. Because only death can achieve that necessary state of complete separation that allows access to pure knowledge.
that second premise, P2, that's where Socrates gets.
Well, he sounds almost aggressively hostile toward the physical world. He doesn't just say the body is a little distracting, he calls it an evil.
He uses incredibly strong language. It's almost surgical. The body is a constant source of error, a constant impediment. Just think about the senses. He says when the soul tries to examine anything using sight or hearing, it is clearly deceived by it.
So it's an evil because it keeps us busy with this endless cycle of needs and desires and fears and illusions. It's just constant noise that prevents any quiet contemplation.
Exactly. A constant noise.
Okay, I have to stop here and just challenge that a little bit. I mean, this view that the body is this unmitigated evil that we have to escape from, isn't that a bit dangerously ascetic? Or maybe just overly pessimistic? Even if the senses are imperfect, aren't they the only way we even begin to encounter things like beauty or justice in this world?
That is a really powerful and necessary challenge. And Socrates, speaking through Plato here, would acknowledge that the body is where we start. But he argues the philosopher must not stop there.
The whole point of philosophy isn't just to look at imperfect examples of beauty. It's to grasp beauty itself. And he sees the body as actively malignant because it makes demands. Demands that just override the search for truth. If you're hungry, you're thinking about food, not about the form of the good.
Right. If you're afraid for your safety, you're not going to pursue knowledge that might put you in danger.
And he takes this even further. He extends it beyond just the personal level and makes this monumental claim about the origin of, well, all societal conflict.
The claim that all wars.
Yes. He makes a really startling claim that all wars and all civil discord can ultimately be traced back to the desire to acquire wealth. And that desire is driven entirely by the needs and the care of the body.
So if we're enslaved to the body, always seeking more food, better clothes, more wealth to satisfy these physical demands, we're just forever competing with each other.
Constantly competing, constantly distracted, and just incapable of the kind of quiet contemplation that philosophy requires. The body, he argues, prevents us from seeing the truth, both personally and politically.
So the life of the philosopher has to be this continuous effort to detach, to purify the self from all these bodily concerns. And this process of purification is what he calls true virtue.
Precisely. And this is where he takes a real swing at conventional morality. He argues that virtues like courage or moderation, when they're practiced by non-philosophers, aren't genuine virtues at all. They're just superficial exchanges of pleasures and pains.
A kind of transactional virtue.
Yes, that's a perfect way to put it. For example, a non-philosopher might show courage by facing death on the battlefield, but only because he fears a greater evil, like being seen as a coward. Or he practices moderation by avoiding one pleasure because he wants the greater pleasure of, say, public praise. It's just trading one bodily desire for another.
It really sounds like he's describing self-interest just masquerading as morality.
Absolutely. True virtue for Socrates is purification. He calls it a purging away of all such things, and he says wisdom is the only valid currency for this transaction.
So wisdom, which you get through reason, allows the soul to see the true value of things, and that lets it separate itself from this false currency of pleasure and pain.
Exactly.
So let's crystallize this first key concept for the listener, this idea of purification.
We can define purification as the process to separate the soul as far as possible from the body and to accustom it to gather itself and collect itself out of every part of the body and to dwell by itself as far as it can, freed, as it were, from the bonds of the body.
So the goal is independence, and that independence leads to wisdom.
That's it. The ultimate message of this first section is crystal clear. If you practice philosophy correctly, you are training for death. And so death should be the least feared event in your life because it is the prerequisite for achieving your greatest desire, pure, unadulterated knowledge.
But even with this compelling argument that philosophers should want to die, the drama of the scene demands that Socrates has to address the skepticism of his friends, and by extension, the listener. Sabes raises the ultimate objection. Even if the soul is happier when it's separated, what if it just ceases to exist? What if it disperses like breath or smoke when you die? Socrates now needs to prove that the soul actually endures.
This is where we make the big transition. We move from the ethics of philosophy to the metaphysics of the soul, and he provides the first major proof of its endurance, the cyclical argument. And it relies on this core concept that all things proceed from their opposites.
Okay, so let's reconstruct this foundational argument, this cycle of life and death.
The first premise, P1, is that all things that come to be from their opposites. We see this all over nature. The larger comes from the smaller, the weaker from the stronger. The state of sleeping comes from the state of waking.
And P2.
P2 is that between any pair of these opposites, there have to be two balancing processes that move things back and forth between them. So you have increasing and decreasing, waking and sleeping.
A two-way street.
A two-way street. Which brings us to P3. Life and death are opposites, and so they must also have corresponding processes. You have dying, which is the movement from life to death. And coming to life again, which must be the movement from death to life.
Okay, and this is the crucial part. What happens if that balance is broken?
That's P4, and it's the cosmological stake of the whole argument. If the process of coming to life again didn't exist, if there were only dying and no rebirth, the universe would eventually just exhaust itself. If there was only sleeping and never waking up, everything would eventually just be asleep forever.
If there were only life turning into death, everything would ultimately have to be dead and nothing alive.
It's an argument from necessity. To maintain the possibility of change and life in the universe, the opposite process has to be continually happening.
So the conclusion, C, is, therefore, the living must come from the dead, which proves that souls have to exist somewhere in the underworld in some interim state so they can be born again into the living world.
Exactly. It confirms the ancient theory that the dead furnish the living. It's a kind of cosmological insurance policy against the universe just collapsing into a state of static death.
So that explores the necessary cycle of life and death. Now let's get to the second major proof, which confirms not just survival after death, but existence before birth. And that is the theory of recollection.
Yes, and recollection is absolutely fundamental because it directly links the soul's preexistence to the existence of the forms. The argument is subtle, but it's powerful.
So if learning is just recovering knowledge the soul had before birth,
then the soul must have existed before we ever started perceiving things with our senses.
And Socrates makes this very abstract idea concrete by using the example of equality. Let's really unpack the logic of that for the listener.
Okay, so P1. To recollect anything, you must have had prior knowledge of it. Recollection isn't creating something new, it's just recovery.
Makes sense.
P2. We all possess knowledge of the form of the equal itself. This is an abstract, perfect concept of equality that is never, ever unequal.
Right. And then P3 is about the messy real world.
Exactly. P3. Sensory objects in the world, like two sticks that look equal, or two stones, are always imperfect. They often appear equal to one person, but unequal to another, or from a different angle. They're just insufficient to grasp the concept of equality itself.
They fall short, they remind us of something better, something perfect.
Yes. The sight of these imperfect sticks just triggers the recovery, the recollection of the perfect, non-sensory standard of the equal itself. We judge the stick's imperfection against this objective standard that's already living in our minds.
So the conclusion is that the soul must have acquired this knowledge of the equal, and by extension, all the other forms like good, beautiful, and just, before we ever started using our senses, which means the soul had to exist before birth.
A very powerful proof of preexistence. It means we are born with these objective standards basically hardwired into our being.
So this leads us directly to a couple of foundational concepts that are going to guide the rest of this discussion. We need to define them clearly.
First, we have to define the forms, or reality. These are invisible, unchanging entities like the just itself, the beautiful itself, the equal itself, and they are accessible only to abstract thought or reason. Particular things in the world share in these forms to get their name or quality.
And they are uniform by itself, remain the same, and never in any way tolerate any change, whatever.
Exactly. And the second concept is recollection, or learning. This is the recovery of knowledge the soul possessed before birth, which is triggered by our sense perceptions of imperfect particulars. As Socrates says, learning is no other than recollection.
Okay, so Simmias is convinced by this. He agrees that proving the forms exist is the same as proving the soul pre-exists. But Sibes, who is always the skeptic,
The wonderful skeptic.
he points out the massive gap in the argument. Pre-existence does not guarantee post-existence.
Right.
So we have a soul that existed before we were born, but it could still just perish like smoke the moment it leaves the body now. The ultimate proof, the proof of indestructibility, is still missing.
And this brings us to the moment of deepest doubt in the entire dialogue.
Simmias and Cebes, who are associates of the Pythagorean philosopher Philolaus, they raise these two really serious, sophisticated objections that just temporarily cast this shadow over the whole room. Everyone starts to panic.
They do. And these objections are essential because they force Socrates to move beyond just proving the soul's existence to analyzing its fundamental nature, its composition, its function. Simmias goes first with his harmony objection.
And this argument is so relatable. Simmias suggests the soul is just an attunement or a harmony,
Right.
just like a lyre is made of wooden strings. And the harmony is this beautiful non-physical result of those physical parts being properly arranged. The soul is just a harmony of the body's physical elements, the hot, the cold, the dry, the moist. So if you break the physical parts, if you cut the strings of the lyre or the body perishes, the harmony of the soul must vanish immediately.
Even though its quality was divine and immortal while it existed, it's a really compelling analogy, but Socrates just systematically refutes it by going back to the philosophical bedrock they've already established, the forms and recollection.
So his defense against the harmony objection has two main parts.
Two logical flaws, yes. The first one appeals directly to the pre-existence argument that Simmias has already accepted.
The recollection contradiction.
Right. Logical flaw one. If the soul is a harmony, it logically has to be composed after its physical elements, the strings and the lyre, are put together. A harmony can't exist before the instrument that creates it. But the theory of recollection, which Simmias agrees is true, proves the soul existed before the body. He can't have it both ways. And when he's forced to choose, Simmias admits that the certainty of recollection is stronger than the analogy of the harmony. The harmony theory is just structurally unsound.
Okay, and the second flaw addresses the soul's active, directive nature.
Logical flaw 2. A harmony is completely determined by its physical parts. It can't resist them or command them. It can't be more or less a harmony. But the soul constantly directs and opposes the body's desires. It resists hunger and thirst. It disciplines passions and fears.
And this is where he pulls out that great quote from Homer.
Yes. He quotes Odysseus from the Odyssey, who, when he's tempted by his desires, struck his breast and rebuked his heart, saying, "Endure, my heart, you have endured worse than this."
That shows the soul isn't just a passive result of the body. It's a ruling, commanding force.
It proves the soul is a much more divine thing than a harmony. It's not just an effect that dies when its cause does.
So the harmony objection is defeated. But Cebes' Weaver objection is still standing, and it requires proof of absolute indestructibility.
And Cebes' analogy is much more resilient. He says the soul is stronger and more durable than the body, like a weaver who lasts longer than many cloaks he makes.
So the soul might weave and wear out many different bodies, many cloaks, over many lifetimes.
But it might still be destroyed after wearing out the last one. Even if it lasts for 1,000 years and through 10 reincarnations, if it's not altogether immortal, then the wise man still has reason to fear death. And this challenge demands that Socrates go beyond just longevity and prove total necessary permanence.
But before he tackles that ultimate challenge, He just hits the brakes on the whole conversation.
Yeah.
And he goes on this crucial philosophical side quest. The warning against misology. Why is this methodological warning so necessary right at this moment?
Because the psychological state of everyone in the room was fear and frustration. They had just seen a seemingly strong argument, the harmony analogy, get proven false. And this leads to intellectual fatigue and, even worse, skepticism about reason itself.
So Socrates warns them that mythology, which is the hatred of reasonable discourse, arises in the same way that misanthropy does.
Exactly. If you trust people over and over again and they keep betraying your trust, you might start to hate all people. In the same way, if you trust arguments that seem sound but are repeatedly proven false, you might start to hate reason itself.
And if you fall into misology, you're just deprived of the truth and knowledge of reality forever.
And Socrates' advice here is so personal and profound. He says when an argument fails, blame your own lack of skill in handling it, not the argument itself. And you just have to keep practicing and getting more rigorous. It's this call for a renewed commitment to good methodology.
And this emphasis on method leads him directly into telling his own philosophical history, why he adopted what he calls the second best course.
Right. He talks about his youthful enthusiasm for natural science. He was captivated by the pre-Socratic philosophers, investigating the causes of everything, why it comes to be, why it perishes, and why it exists.
And he was particularly excited by Anaxagoras and his idea that mind, or nous, directs and is the cause of everything.
But he was, because Socrates assumed that if mind directed the universe, then Anaxagoras would explain the purpose of everything, the final cause, the best way for things to be arranged.
He was looking for teleology. The ultimate purpose or goodness is the real explanation.
Precisely. But his disappointment was just crushing, because instead of providing the ultimate why, the good Anaxagoras just defaulted back to merely physical causes like air and ether and water, the mechanical how.
And he illustrates this perfectly with that famous anecdote about why he's sitting there in prison.
It's brilliant. He says, if you ask a physical scientist why Socrates is sitting here, they would say it's because his body is made of bones and sinews, and the contraction and relaxation of those sinews are what enable him to bend his limbs into a sitting position.
But the true cause, the cause that actually matters, is his choice. The fact that he decided it was best and more right to remain and to endure whatever penalty they ordered rather than escape and run away.
And to confuse the physical mechanism, the sinews and bones, with the moral choice, the best course of action, is to speak very lazily and carelessly. The physical causes are just the necessary conditions, that without which the true cause couldn't operate. But they are not the true causes themselves.
So, because he was so disappointed by the physical method's inability to grasp the true cause, the good, Socrates retreated. And this is where he developed the hypothesis method, his second best course.
This is such a critical philosophical move. Instead of relying on fallible sense perception or mechanical explanations, he retreated to the clarity of logical consistency. So we can define the hypothesis method as a chosen theory, in this case the existence of the forms, that seems most compelling, which you then use as a foundation. You consider as true whatever agreed with this, and as untrue whatever did not so agree.
So you start with a strong assumption and then rigorously test everything else against it for consistency.
You do. And he says his hypothesis is nothing new. It's the existence of the forms. And now he has to use this rigorous method to deliver the final, undeniable proof of the soul's immortality.
The stage is now set for the most complex argument in the entire Phaedo, aimed directly at defeating Seb's Weaver objection. He has to prove the soul isn't just long-lasting, but necessarily indestructible.
And he achieves this by using his refined understanding of the forms. We have to approach this one slowly, because it requires us to make a crucial distinction.
What's that?
We have to distinguish between the form itself and a thing that necessarily carries the form. That distinction is the engine of this entire final proof.
So before, we just said that opposites, like tallness and shortness, don't admit each other. A thing that is tall will never become short while it's still tall.
Now we go a step further. Let's take the number 3. 3 is not the opposite of evenness.
Right. The opposite of evenness is oddness.
Exactly. However, the number 3, by its very nature, always carries the form of oddness. It is a carrier of a form.
And because the number 3 inherently carries oddness, it can never, under any circumstances, admit the opposite of oddness, which is evenness.
Right. If evenness approaches the number 3 must either retreat or perish. It cannot become even while it remains 3. The same thing applies to fire, which necessarily carries the form of hotness. It can never admit coldness. If coldness approaches fire, the fire either retreats or is extinguished, but it doesn't become cold while it's still fire.
That distinction is the key insight. The carrier, when it's confronted with the opposite of its inherent form, has to either flee or cease to exist. But the property it carries, like hotness or oddness, remains what it is.
And now we apply this exact logic to the soul and to life.
Okay, so let's reconstruct this final, rigorous argument, the argument from indestructibility.
P1. The soul, by its defining essence, is what brings life to the body it occupies. Therefore, the soul is, necessarily, a life bringer.
Okay, P2. Death is the necessary opposite of life.
P3. That which always carries a form, and in this case the life bringer, the soul, will never admit the opposite of that form, which is death, just as the number 3 will never admit evenness.
And P4.
P4. That which does not admit death is, by definition, called deathless.
So P5. Since the soul does not admit death, it is deathless. And all things that are deathless, like the gods or the forms themselves, are universally agreed to be indestructible.
Which brings us to the conclusion. C. Therefore, the soul, being deathless, is also necessarily indestructible.
The genius of this argument is that it completely bypasses the question of how long the soul lasts. It proves the soul's inherent nature, that it belongs to a class of things like the number 3 belongs to the class of odd numbers that are just fundamentally incompatible with their corresponding opposite.
The soul is chemically incompatible with death. That's a great way to put it.
If death approaches, the soul can't stop being the life bringer. It has to simply retreat, remaining intact as this eternal carrier of life.
And this finally satisfies Seebees. He admits, I have nothing more to say against that, nor can I doubt your arguments.
So we have our final glossary term here, deathless. That which does not admit death. This is the defining essential characteristic of the soul, which ensures life and, as a consequence, proves its total indestructibility.
And this rigorous conclusion really marks the philosophical climax of the dialogue. Socrates has shown that his confidence in the face of death is not based on mere hope or probability, but on logical necessity, grounded in the immutable nature of reality itself, the forms.
So with the soul now proven immortal, the conversation immediately pivots from metaphysics back to ethics. If the soul is immortal, then the terrible danger isn't death itself. It's failing to care for your soul during your life by pursuing virtue and wisdom. The state of your soul at the moment of death determines its eternal fate.
This is the profound ethical turn. He says the soul goes to the underworld, possessing nothing but its education and upbringing, which will bring it either the greatest benefit or harm. We spend our whole lives shaping this one possession, and now it faces judgment.
And this brings us back to what is probably the most critical, most quoted, and certainly the densest concept in the entire argument. Why this separation from the body is so necessary for wisdom.
Yes, the crux paragraph.
Let's look at that crux paragraph. Can you read it for us?
Of course. The paragraph says, it really has been shown to us that if we are ever to have pure knowledge, we must escape from the body and observe things in themselves with the soul by itself. It seems likely that we shall only then, when we are dead, attain that which we desire and of which we claim to be lovers, namely wisdom, as our argument shows, not while we live. For if it is impossible to attain any pure knowledge with the body, then one of two things is true. Either we can never attain knowledge, or we can do so after death.
Okay, that sounds like a philosophical dead end if you stop there. If pure knowledge is the goal and the body prevents you from getting it, why bother living at all? Let's give that a really detailed, plain English explanation.
The difficulty here is in understanding what he means by pure knowledge. Socrates is arguing that our ultimate goal as philosophers is perfect truth, a pure, unmixed understanding of concepts like justice or beauty. But throughout life, the body is a fatally flawed instrument for that pursuit.
It's distracting and confusing.
Fundamentally distracting and confusing. The body forces us to worry about safety, hunger, sickness, all these desires. It introduces constant noise and error. And what's more, our senses, sight, touch, hearing, they only give us these fleeting glimpses of imperfect, changing things. Sticks that look equal, but aren't equality itself.
So since the body is this inherently noisy, demanding, flawed medium for accessing true reality, which is the forms,
the only time the soul can engage in perfect, pure, unmixed observation of that reality is when it is completely separate from the body. And that state of necessary separation is death.
So philosophy during life is not just about achieving some state of mind. It's about rehearsing for the final, necessary act of detachment.
Absolutely. Think of our deep-sea scientist analogy. Imagine you're trying to study a delicate, luminous, deep-sea organism. That organism represents the perfect, pure truth, the forms. And you're trying to study it by using this heavy, clumsy, outdated submersible. That submersible is the body.
So the submersible is shaking, the lights are distorting all the colors, and its heavy metal arms keep stirring up mud from the seafloor and damaging the specimen you're trying to look at.
The body and its senses are actively corrupting the truth. The scientist has two choices: accept this muddy, distorted view, or find a way to get a pure, perfect viewing. The only way to see that organism perfectly in its true, pure, unchanging state is with a sophisticated, pure, remote, high-definition camera that can operate independently far away from that clumsy submersible.
And that pure, independent camera is the soul after death.
Exactly. The body isn't just a net. It's a net that actively contaminates the specimen. And this clarifies why death is seen as a liberation, not a loss.
That makes the imperative of purification perfectly clear. And the stakes are immense. Which brings us to the final cosmological implications, the myth of the afterlife.
Since the soul is immortal, Socrates describes the geography of the underworld. And it's not just some empty void, it's a complex realm governed by judgment. He talks about the true earth above our world, which is pure, colored by true beauty, and inhabited by the gods. Our world, by comparison, is just a collection of mud and sediment, like creatures living at the bottom of the ocean.
And the soul, guided by a guardian spirit that was allotted to it in life, travels to the underworld, to Hades. And Socrates describes this realm with these great chasms and 4 major rivers flowing through them.
Yes, the 4 main rivers all flow into this great chasm, Tartarus, which is like the ultimate sinkhole of the cosmos. You have Oceanus, Acheron, the fiery Pyriphlegethon, and the icy Styx, or Cocytus.
And the judgment process, based on the soul's education and upbringing, is incredibly strict.
It is. The soul is judged based on the degree of its purification. Incurable criminals, those who committed just terrible enormities like great sacrileges or wicked, deliberate murders, are irrevocably cast into Tartarus forever.
But the fate of the curable criminals is much more fascinating. It really speaks to this possibility of atonement.
It does. Curable criminals are punished in Tartarus for a set amount of time based on their crimes. But crucially, they are then thrown out yearly by the specific rivers related to those crimes. Pyriphlegethon hurls out those who committed murder. Cocytus hurls out parasites.
And they're swept to the Acherusian lake, where they have to desperately beg for forgiveness from the people they wronged.
And if they succeed in persuading their victims, their suffering ends and they are released. If not, they're swept right back into Tartarus by the river to endure the cycle all over again.
That detail adds such a powerful ethical layer. The punishment is tied directly to reconciliation, and the highest reward, of course, is reserved for the true philosopher.
Those who purified themselves sufficiently by philosophy, those who lived pure, detached lives focused on wisdom, they don't have to go into any river cycle. They will live without a body on the true surface of the earth, dwelling in purity and beauty and communicating directly with the gods.
The philosophical work is complete. The argument is made. The path is outlined. And this brings us to the final, incredibly emotional conclusion, Socrates' last moments.
And the description is clearly designed to emphasize his serenity. He takes a bath before he drinks the poison, just to save the women the trouble of washing his corpse later.
Right.
And when Phaedo asks how they should bury him, Socrates instructs him not to weep or say he is burying Socrates, because the Socrates who is speaking will have gone away. He's making it clear that his identity is inextricably linked to his soul, not his body.
He takes the poison without any hesitation, utterly calm, and just walks around until his legs begin to feel heavy.
And then, just before the cold poison reaches his heart, he delivers those legendary, mysterious final words.
Credo, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Make this offering to him and do not forget.
Yes.
This request, made literally with his dying breath, is the final, perfect summation of his entire life and philosophy. Why Asclepius?
Asclepius was the Greek god of medicine and healing. A cock was the traditional sacrifice made to him by people who had been cured of a grave illness. So Socrates, in his final moment, is declaring that death is not a punishment or a misfortune, it's a cure.
A liberation from the illness or the imprisonment of life in the body?
It encapsulates the entire argument they just completed. Philosophy led him to wisdom, wisdom led him to purification, and death is the final necessary step in that purification, the cure for the body's distracting evil.
The end of a life that belonged to a man who was, according to Phaedo, of all those we have known the best, and also the wisest and the most upright.
This deep dive into the Phaedo really leaves us with some monumental takeaways, not just about immortality, but about philosophical method. We covered 4 major pillars.
Philosophy as preparation for death,
The soul's preexistence proven by recollection.
The soul being indestructible because it is deathless.
And finally, that the purified quality of your life dictates your ultimate fate in the immortal afterlife.
And, maybe the most relevant lesson for us today is the methodology. When he was faced with the complexities of truth, Socrates chose to abandon the fickle world of physical causes for the rigor of his hypothesis method. He rejected Anaxagoras' merely mechanical explanation for the deeper teleological explanation of the good.
And this just reinforces the necessity of critical thinking, of avoiding mythology, and of adopting a reliable philosophical foundation when you're seeking difficult truths. We have to prioritize the explanation of purpose and reason over just a mechanical description.
So the philosopher's ultimate goal is pure wisdom, and that is attained only through the final, complete separation from the body's influence. The Phaedo forces us to confront this final, really provocative thought. If you accept the necessity of caring for your immortal soul to dictate your ultimate fate, what does it really mean to live a truly philosophical life today? What bodily preoccupation, what addiction, what enslavement to wealth or desire, what evil that keeps you busy are you willing to finally let go of in preparation for the only thing that truly matters?
The pursuit of wisdom demands nothing less than this constant process of purification.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We hope you feel a little bit wiser and certainly more prepared for whatever comes next.